There are days when the world feels perfectly ordinary, when the morning light pours through the curtains just so, when the kettle whistles on the stove, and when even the silence in the house feels kind. But sometimes on those very ordinary days something happens that shifts the air as if the whole room is holding its breath. That afternoon began with nothing unusual. I had been in the garden earlier, trimming back the roses that had grown wild along the fence. My knees ached, my back stiffened, and by the time I carried the clippers inside, all I wanted was a quiet cup of chamomile tea. I folded a dish towel neatly, set the kettle on the stove, and let the familiar scent of lavender sachets drift from the drawer where I kept them. The house was calm, the kind of calm I had grown used to since Robert passed. Most days I didn't mind it, though sometimes, if I was honest, it felt too still, like the walls had swallowed the sound of laughter and refused to give it back. I had just settled into my chair, the one by the window where the light spills onto the floorboards, when I heard it. A knock. 3 soft raps on the door. Not urgent, not loud, but enough to make me pause. I wasn't expecting anyone. Judy, my neighbor, always called first if she wanted to bring banana bread. The mailman never knocked, and my daughter lived 2 states away. Curious, I rose slowly, smoothing my apron, and opened the door. There he stood, Evan. My neighbor's boy. Only he wasn't really a boy anymore. 25 now, tall and broad-shouldered, with that same tousled brown hair he'd had since he was a teenager. I remembered when he used to mow the lawn barefoot in the summers, waving shyly as he passed. This time he wasn't waving. He was standing on my porch, shifting a little awkwardly, a toolbox balanced in one hand. "Hi, Miss Margaret," he said, his smile crooked but warm. "Sorry to bother you. I was wondering if I could borrow a wrench. Dad's at work, and I kind of promised Mom I'd fix the loose hinge on the gate before tonight." I smiled, relief softening my chest. Just a neighbor's son, here for tools. Something simple, something ordinary. "Of course, Evan," I said. "Come in, I'll find it for you." Before I go further, dear listener, if you've ever had moments when the ordinary suddenly felt extraordinary, when someone you thought you knew looked at you in a way you couldn't quite explain, then you'll understand why this story lingers with me. If you enjoy real stories about life, love, and the unexpected turns of the heart, please subscribe to this channel. These stories don't belong to just one of us. They live in all of us. Now let me tell you what happened next. I stepped into the hallway, motioning for Evan to follow. He hesitated, then stepped inside, glancing around as though he were checking if everything was still as he remembered. His eyes lingered briefly on the photo above the fireplace. Robert and me years ago, laughing under a wide-brimmed sun hat. "You haven't changed a thing," Evan said softly. His voice caught me off guard. There was something in the way he said it. Not just polite, not just observation. Something deeper, though I brushed it aside quickly. "The wrench should be in the drawer by the pantry," I said, moving briskly toward the kitchen. But when I turned, he was closer than I expected, standing in the doorway, the sunlight catching his face. And for a brief moment I saw it, the look. Not the hurried glance of a neighbor's son, not the casual smile of a boy asking for a tool. No, this was something steadier, searching, almost different. It unsettled me. My heart gave a small, sharp beat, as though reminding me I was alive in ways I hadn't thought about in years. I pushed the thought away, fumbling in the drawer until my fingers wrapped around the wrench. I turned, holding it out to him, and his hand brushed mine as he took it. Just a brush. Just a second. But in that moment the air shifted. The same quiet house that had felt so ordinary now hummed with something unnamed. "Thank you, Miss Margaret," he said, his voice low. But his eyes, they lingered on me just a moment too long. And that was how it began. Evan stood there a moment longer than necessary, wrench in hand, sunlight framing his figure in the doorway. For just an instant, it felt as though time itself had slowed, catching me in the strangeness of his gaze. My breath came shallow, and I quickly turned back to the counter, fussing with the dish towel as though it required urgent attention. "Careful with that hinge," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's stubborn. Took Robert 3 tries the last time it came loose." Evan chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I'll manage. I've learned a thing or two since then." Something about the way he said it made me glance up. His eyes weren't on the wrench or the doorway, they were still on me. It unsettled me, and yet I didn't look away. Not immediately. Finally, I broke the moment, smoothing my apron. "Well, you know where to find me if it gives you trouble." He nodded, but instead of leaving right away, he lingered in the kitchen doorway. His gaze flicked over the photographs on the wall, the china cabinet, the Afghan draped over the couch. "This house," he said softly, "it always feels different from ours. Plumber. Like it remembers." The words struck something deep. For years I'd felt this house carried the weight of memories, some too heavy to name. And now here was this young man noticing it without me having to explain. "Maybe it does remember," I said carefully. "Maybe some places hold on to what we leave behind." Evan's smile tilted, half wistful. "I think that's why I always liked coming here when I was younger. It felt safe." Safe. The word lodged in my chest. I wanted to ask safe from what, but before I could, he shifted the wrench in his hand and said, "I'll get to that hinge." He left then, but not before his hand brushed lightly against the doorframe, as if he were reluctant to step away. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. I found myself pacing, setting and resetting the teacups on the table, though I wasn't expecting company. My thoughts tangled, circling back to the way his eyes had lingered on mine, the strange electricity in the brush of his hand. It was foolish, I told myself. He was just being polite, just grateful. I had known Evan since he was a boy. I remembered patching a tear in his shirt when he skinned his knee, pouring him lemonade on hot afternoons. And yet, the man who stood in my kitchen today was no longer that boy. I caught myself standing at the window, watching the line of his shoulders as he bent over the gate, working with easy strength. The wrench glinted in the sun, his hands sure, movements confident. My heart betrayed me with its quickened beat, and I pulled the curtain closed before he could look up. It must have been an hour before I heard the gate latch click into place. Moments later the knock came again, softer this time, almost tentative. When I opened the door, Evan stood there holding the wrench. His hair was damp with sweat, his shirt clinging slightly to his back, but his smile was boyish, unguarded. "Fixed," he said simply, holding out the wrench. I took it, careful not to let our fingers touch, though they nearly did. "Thank you, Evan. Your mother will be pleased." His smile lingered. "She might be. But I think I did it more for me." The words caught me off guard, leaving me unsure how to reply. I busied myself with setting the wrench on the shelf, but I could feel his eyes on me, steady and searching. "Would you like some iced tea?" I asked finally, more to fill the silence than from intent. He brightened at once. "I'd like that." We sat at the kitchen table, 2 glasses of tea sweating in the afternoon warmth. For a while we spoke of simple things. The weather, his job at the auto shop, the classes he'd once thought about taking but never had. But every so often I'd catch him looking at me, not quick glances, not careless looks. Longer, heavier, as though he was trying to read something written beneath my skin. At one point I laughed softly at a memory of Robert's endless tinkering in the shed, how he always insisted he could fix anything with duct tape. Evan leaned in then, his smile fading into something softer. "I miss seeing that," he said quietly. "The way you lit up when you talked about him. It's rare. People don't love like that anymore." My chest tightened. The ache of Robert's absence pressed close, but so did the warmth of being seen, truly seen by someone who remembered. "Love like that doesn't leave," I whispered. "It changes form, but it stays." Our eyes met then, and for a moment the air felt charged again. Alive, uncertain, dangerous. When Evan finally rose to leave, the sun was dipping low, painting the kitchen in gold. He paused at the doorway, turning back. "Thank you for the tea," he said, but his voice carried more than politeness. "I'll see you soon?" It wasn't a question. Not really. More like a promise. And as the door closed behind him, I realized my heart was still racing, as though something had been set in motion, something I wasn't sure I could stop. 2 days passed before I saw him again. I told myself I hadn't been waiting, but the truth is I noticed every sound outside the window, every footstep near the fence, wondering if it might be Evan. The quiet that once felt comforting now pressed heavy, as though the house itself had gone still in his absence. On the 3rd afternoon I was in the kitchen kneading bread when the knock came again. 3 raps, soft, deliberate. My heart gave a quick start, though my hands kept pressing into the dough, pretending calm. When I opened the door, there he was. Evan stood with that same crooked smile, but this time he wasn't holding a toolbox. Instead he carried a small jar of honey. "Mom made too much," he said, lifting it slightly. "She thought you might like some." I smiled, taking the jar. "That's kind of her. Tell her I said thank you." "I will," he replied, though his eyes didn't shift toward the street, toward home. They stayed on me, steady, patient. "Would you like to come in for a moment?" The words left my lips before I'd fully thought them through. Evan nodded, stepping inside, his presence filling the small hallway as though the space itself had been waiting. He set the honey on the counter, then glanced toward the stove where the bread dough was resting. "You're baking," he said, his voice softer now. "It's what I do when the house feels too quiet," I admitted before I could stop myself. He leaned against the counter, watching me with a look that made my chest tighten. "I always liked that smell. Even when I was a kid walking past this house, it felt warmer than ours." I busied myself with flour on the board, but my hands weren't steady. "You give too much credit to simple bread." "It's not the bread," he said simply. I froze then, my palms pressing flat against the dough. I dared not ask what he meant, but the silence between us spoke loudly enough. When the bread was in the oven, I poured 2 cups of tea. Evan sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun painting his profile in gold. For a long while we said little, just the clink of cups, the quiet ticking of the wall clock. But every time I glanced up, I found his eyes waiting, meeting mine without hesitation. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally, his voice steady. I nodded, though my throat felt dry. "Do you ever get lonely here?" The question landed heavy because it was too close to the truth. For years I had buried the answer under routines, under polite smiles. But spoken aloud, it pressed against my ribs. "Yes," I said softly after too long a pause. "More often than I care to admit." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. "I know what that feels like." The way he said it, the depth in his voice, made me realize he wasn't speaking about some vague emptiness. He was speaking about now. About us. The bread finished baking, breaking the moment with its sharp ding. I rose quickly, grateful for the distraction, though my hands trembled as I pulled the loaf from the oven. Evan stood too, moving beside me, reaching for a towel just as I did. Our fingers brushed, longer this time, neither of us pulling away at once. The warmth of his skin lingered, more startling than the heat of the oven. I looked up sharply and found him already looking down at me, his eyes dark, searching. For a second, just a second, it felt as though the world tilted, the air thick with something I couldn't name. My breath caught and I stepped back quickly, setting the loaf on the counter. "Thank you," I said, my voice unsteady. He didn't press, didn't laugh it off. He only nodded, though the look in his eyes didn't fade. When Evan finally left, carrying half the loaf I insisted he take home, the house felt different again. Not empty, not quiet, but as though his presence still lingered in the air, in the brush of his hand against mine, in the question he had dared to ask. I told myself it was nothing. Just kindness, just youth, just a neighbor's son remembering the warmth of childhood. But when I lay down that night, my hands still tingled with the memory of his touch. And I realized with a pang of both fear and longing that the question wasn't whether he would return. It was what might happen the next time he did. The sky darkened earlier than usual that day, clouds rolling in heavy and low. I had just finished folding the laundry when the first rumble of thunder shook the windows. The forecast had mentioned rain, but I hadn't expected a storm like this. By the time I lit the lamp in the sitting room, the rain had begun in earnest, pelting the roof in sheets. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard in sharp bursts, and then came another knock, 3 soft raps, unmistakable even against the storm. My heart leapt. I opened the door to find Evan, drenched from head to toe, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held a jacket that did little against the rain, and water pooled at his feet as he stepped inside. "Sorry, Miss Margaret," he said breathlessly. "I was walking back from the shop when the sky opened up. I thought I'd wait it out here if you don't mind." "Of course," I said quickly, ushering him in. "You'll catch cold out there." I fetched a towel, fussing over him more than I meant to, patting his shoulders, pressing the fabric into his hands. The closeness was unsteadying, the smell of rain and motor oil clinging to his skin. We sat in the living room, the storm raging outside, the air inside thick with quiet. Evan leaned forward, rubbing his damp hair with the towel. His shirt clung to his chest and I forced my gaze away, settling it on the fire I had just stoked in the hearth. "It's strange," he said after a moment, "but storms never scared me when I was here. At our house they always felt too loud, too sharp. But here, it feels different. Safer." The word again, safe. I managed a small smile. "Perhaps it's just the fire," I said, though my voice didn't sound entirely like my own. Or perhaps it's you, he murmured. The words landed between us, heavy and undeniable. I should have dismissed them, should have scolded gently, reminded him of his mother waiting just next door. But instead I found myself staring into the flames, my pulse quickening. The rain hammered on, refusing to let up. An hour passed, maybe more. Evan had moved closer to the fire, his long legs stretched out, the towel draped across his lap. We talked about little things, stories from the past, bits of memory I hadn't shared aloud in years. He listened intently as though every word mattered. At one point I grew quiet, lost in thought. He noticed. "What is it?" he asked softly. I hesitated, then admitted, "It's been a long time since I've had someone to sit with during a storm." His eyes softened, and for a moment the sound of rain seemed to fade. "Then I'm glad I'm here." Lightning flashed again, and instinctively I flinched. Before I realized it, Evan's hand was on mine, steady, grounding. Not a quick touch this time, not an accident. A deliberate warmth, firm enough to still the trembling I hadn't realized had betrayed me. I should have pulled away. Every rule, every line in my mind screamed at me to do so. But I didn't. My fingers stayed beneath his, my heart thrumming with the storm. We sat like that longer than we should have, the fire crackling, the storm raging, our hands joined in quiet defiance of all the lines I once thought immovable. Finally I rose, my knees unsteady. "You should dry off more thoroughly," I said quickly, retreating toward the kitchen. "I'll make some cocoa." Evan didn't argue. But when I glanced back, his eyes followed me, not curious, not casual. Something deeper. Something that left me shaken. The storm carried on late into the night. By the time it softened to rain, Evan had finished his cocoa, and I had found a spare blanket for him to take across the yard. But when I held it out, he shook his head slightly. "It's still pouring," he said, his voice low. Maybe I should stay here tonight. Just until morning." The words lingered in the air, heavier than thunder. I felt the walls of the house closing in, the silence pressing tight. I nodded slowly, though my chest ached with confusion. "The guest room is made up," I said quietly. His eyes held mine a moment longer, unreadable, before he whispered, "Thank you." And as he carried the blanket down the hall, the storm outside seemed to have found its echo in the storm within me. The storm pressed on, softer now but steady, the rain falling in sheets against the windows. The house felt smaller, the silence thicker, as Evan carried the folded blanket down the hall. I stood in the kitchen a moment longer than I needed, clutching the dish towel, my breath shallow. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to stay the night if weather made the walk home impossible. But this was different, and I knew it. The air between us had shifted too many times already for me to pretend otherwise. I made sure the guest room was ready. The quilt pulled tight, the lamp glowing softly. When I turned, he was there in the doorway, his hair still damp, his eyes searching mine. "I don't want to be any trouble," he said quietly. "You're not," I answered, though my voice wavered. "The room's yours for the night." He stepped inside, running a hand along the old dresser. "Feels familiar," he murmured. "I remember hiding in here once when I was small. Your husband found me under the bed." The memory landed gently, tugging at both of us. For a moment, the years seemed to fold in on themselves. Him as a boy, me as the neighbor's wife, Robert still alive and laughing. I lingered at the door too long, my hand resting on the frame. I should have left then, retreated to my own room, but his presence held me there. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For tonight. For everything." Our eyes met, and I saw it again, that something unspoken flickering just beneath his calm. It unsettled me, but it also warmed something in me I hadn't felt in years. "Good night, Evan," I whispered, closing the door gently before the silence between us swallowed me whole. Back in my room, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The storm outside matched the storm in me, uneasy, restless, alive. I thought of his hand on mine by the fire, the steady warmth of it, how I hadn't pulled away. I thought of the way he had looked at me, not like a neighbor, not like a boy I once watched grow up. Something else. I turned over, trying to will sleep, but the ticking clock seemed louder than ever. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. And then I heard it, a soft creak down the hall. My breath caught. Footsteps, hesitant, careful against the old wood floor. They paused outside my door. I held still, unsure if I wanted the sound to fade or the knob to turn. It didn't turn. The steps lingered, then shifted away back toward the guest room. A long breath escaped me, though my chest still ached with confusion. Why had he come? Why had he stopped? The rain eased near dawn, a lighter patter against the windows. I finally drifted into shallow sleep, only to wake with the scent of coffee filling the house. I pulled on my robe and padded down the hall. Evan stood in the kitchen, hair tousled, sleeves rolled to his elbows, fumbling with the percolator. He looked up when I entered, a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. "Morning," he said softly. "I didn't mean to wake you. I thought I'd make coffee to thank you for letting me stay." Something about the scene, the sunlight slanting through the curtains, his tall frame bent over the old stove, sent a wave of warmth and unease through me. It was the kind of morning I hadn't shared with anyone in years. We sat across from each other at the table, mugs warming our hands. He looked tired, as if sleep had been elusive for him too. "Storm kept me awake," he admitted. But maybe it wasn't just the storm. I didn't answer right away, staring into my coffee. The silence was full, charged, waiting. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you ever wonder if some things happen for a reason? That maybe we end up where we're meant to be, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else?" The words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. My throat tightened, my heart unsteady. I met his gaze across the table. His eyes held no mischief, no casual boyishness. Only something steady, something raw. I should have told him no. Should have reminded him of the boundaries, the years, the lines no one dared cross. But instead I stayed silent. And in that silence something shifted again. Something I couldn't name but could no longer ignore. The morning sun broke through after the storm, the air damp and heavy with the smell of wet earth. Puddles glistened in the yard, and the garden, my pride, my refuge, looked battered but alive. I pulled on my boots after breakfast, determined to set things right. Evan offered immediately, "Let me help, Miss Margaret. You shouldn't be out there alone." I wanted to refuse, to remind him I'd tended this garden for decades on my own. But when I saw the sincerity in his eyes, I only nodded. "All right. But you'll get mud all over those shoes of yours." He just grinned, rolling his sleeves higher, and followed me out. We worked side by side among the rows of tomatoes and beans. He pulled weeds while I propped up stalks bent from the storm. The rhythm of our movements was almost wordless, almost too familiar. At one point I stumbled on the soft earth. His hand shot out, steadying me by the elbow. "Careful," he murmured, his voice close, low. I looked up, and for the briefest moment our eyes locked. The air between us thickened, heavy with something unnamed. I pulled away gently, brushing soil from my gloves. "I'm fine," I said quickly, though my heart raced. Later we sat on the back steps, sweat dampening our clothes, glasses of sweet tea sweating in our hands. The yard hummed with cicadas, the kind of sound that always made afternoons feel slower. "You've built something beautiful here," Evan said suddenly, nodding toward the rows of green. "It's more than a garden. It feels alive. Like it belongs to you and you belong to it." The words stirred something deep. I looked away, fussing with my glass. "It's just plants," I replied softly. "No," he said firmly. "Everything about this place feels like you." I couldn't meet his eyes then, because in that moment I feared he saw too much. The rest of the day passed in a kind of hush. We shared lunch, simple sandwiches at the table, our conversation light but laced with unspoken things. When he laughed, boyish and unguarded, I found myself smiling in spite of the unease curling in my chest. By evening, I had nearly convinced myself the storm had unsettled me, that nothing had changed. But then came the glance. It happened as I was setting the table for supper. I turned, carrying plates, and found him watching me, not with casual neighborly affection, not with the distracted air of youth, but with something more deliberate, more searching. The look was steady, unflinching, and it made me set the plates down too quickly, my hands trembling just enough to rattle the silverware. He didn't look away. I busied myself with the bread basket, my pulse hammering. "Soup's nothing special," I murmured, trying to fill the silence. "It doesn't matter," he said softly. "It's the company that does." Dinner stretched out longer than usual. The scrape of spoons against bowls, the ticking of the kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, every sound seemed louder than our voices. At one point his knee brushed mine under the table. Not forcefully, not even intentionally, perhaps. But neither of us moved away. I felt the heat of it long after. Later we sat again on the porch swing, the air still thick with summer. The chains creaked softly as we swayed. Stars blinked faintly above, shy after the storm. Evan leaned back, one arm draped along the back of the swing, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My hands folded in my lap, but I couldn't stop the tremor in my breath. He turned to me suddenly, his voice low. You ever wonder if people see us the way we see each other? The question hit like lightning, though no storm remained. My throat tightened. I didn't answer. His gaze lingered on me, steady, patient. Then he looked away, exhaling slowly as though he'd said more than he meant to. We sat in silence, the swing rocking, the night pressing close. And though no words followed, though no boundary was crossed, I knew something had shifted again, so deeply this time that I couldn't pretend otherwise. The following evening carried a stillness that felt heavier than the storm had. The cicadas sang, the last of the sunset streaked orange across the horizon, and the house glowed with the faint light of lamps. I had set aside my knitting, unable to focus. My hands were restless, my thoughts even more so. Every glance, every touch from the past 2 days lingered like an echo I couldn't silence. When Evan knocked again, softer this time, almost hesitant, I wasn't surprised. Some part of me had been waiting for it. He stepped inside, his hair brushed back neatly, a clean shirt replacing yesterday's mud-stained one. He looked almost too composed, as if he'd rehearsed something. I didn't come for tools, he said quietly before I could even ask. My chest tightened. I folded my hands in front of me, steadying my breath. Then why are you here? His eyes searched mine, unflinching. Because I can't keep pretending I don't feel it anymore. The room stilled. My heart thudded once, heavy before racing. I forced a laugh, thin and brittle. Evan, you're young. You don't know what you're saying. But he only shook his head. I do. I've known it for a long time. I just didn't know if I should speak it. Or if you'd listen. I turned away, my hands trembling as I fussed with the lace curtain. The night air drifted in, carrying the smell of honeysuckle, but it did little to calm me. You don't understand, I whispered. There are lines. Boundaries. Things that aren't meant to be crossed. His footsteps moved closer, slow but certain. And yet, he said gently, we've already crossed them. Haven't we? The memory of his hand on mine by the fire, his knee brushing mine under the table, the glance he had given me in the kitchen, they all rose unbidden, undeniable. My silence was answer enough. He stopped just behind me, his voice lower now. I don't care what it looks like to anyone else. When I'm here I feel like I belong. Like I can finally breathe. I closed my eyes, torn between wanting to flee and wanting to lean back into the warmth of his nearness. My throat ached with words I didn't want to admit. Finally, I whispered, and what do you expect of me? He hesitated, then answered with disarming honesty, nothing you don't want to give. I just need you to know you're not invisible to me. You're not just my neighbor. You're more. The confession landed deep, stirring something I'd buried for years. Loneliness, sharp and unrelenting, had lived with me since Robert passed. And now, standing in my quiet house with Evan's words hanging in the air, I felt that loneliness cracking open. I turned at last, facing him fully. His expression was steady, unguarded. No mischief, no jest. Only truth. You'll ruin yourself speaking like this, I said, though my voice trembled. Or I'll save myself, he countered softly, because it's the first time I've spoken what's real. Our eyes locked, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to narrow to just the space between us. My chest rose and fell unsteady, and I feared he could hear the wild rhythm of my heart. I stepped back quickly, breaking the moment. Sit down, I said, forcing firmness into my tone. If you're going to be here, you'll have tea, nothing more. His lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, but he obeyed, sinking into the armchair. We sat in silence, tea steaming between us. My hands clutched the cup as though it might anchor me. Finally, he spoke again, softer this time. You don't have to answer me tonight. I just needed you to know. I nodded once, unable to meet his gaze. The clock ticked on, the house wrapped around us like a witness, and though no touch was shared, no line visibly crossed, something had already changed forever. The night after Evan's confession had been restless. I lay awake long after he left, the ticking clock on the mantel louder than ever. His words circled through my mind, heavy and insistent. You're not invisible to me. You're more. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and fragile. By the time dawn broke, pale light spilling across the lace curtains, I rose already weary. I moved through the motions, setting the kettle on the stove, slicing bread for toasting, as if routine could erase what had been spoken. But nothing erased it. His voice clung to the air like the scent of honeysuckle after rain. The knock came again, soft but certain. I almost pretended not to hear. But my feet betrayed me, carrying me to the door before my mind caught up. Evan stood there, fresh from the morning air, hair damp from washing, a small paper bag in his hand. He smiled, though it was gentler than usual, careful. I brought muffins, he said simply. From the bakery. I stepped aside, letting him in though my heart protested. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning light slanting across the worn wood. He set the muffins out between us. Blueberry my favorite, though I hadn't told him that. You didn't have to, I murmured, breaking a piece off one, more to busy my hands than out of hunger. I wanted to, he replied. The silence stretched, filled with the clink of knives on plates and the hum of the old refrigerator. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. Something had shifted and both of us knew it. After breakfast, I slipped into the garden, hoping the quiet work would settle me. Evan followed without asking, picking up the spade as though it had always been his place to help. We worked side by side again, pulling weeds, reteeing stems, watering the thirsty soil. The sun was warm, the earth damp beneath our feet. And yet it was not like yesterday. Every glance, every brush of his shoulder as we moved past one another, carried the weight of unspoken words. At one point, as I leaned to tie a stalk, my back stiffened. Without a word, his hand pressed lightly at my side, steadying me. You should be careful, he said softly. I froze. The touch was simple, almost nothing. And yet it sent a shiver through me, a reminder of all the years since anyone had reached for me like that. Evan, I whispered, though I didn't finish the thought. By midday we rested again on the back steps, glasses of water sweating in our hands. The cicadas sang, the air thick with heat. I meant what I said last night, he murmured suddenly, breaking the hush. I didn't look at him. My eyes stayed fixed on the garden. And I told you, there are lines. I know, he said. But lines don't stop me from feeling it. Or from seeing you the way I do. My throat tightened. The words I should have spoken, words of refusal, of distance, caught in my chest and stayed there. Instead I whispered, you're too young to understand what it costs to cross such lines. He turned then, his gaze steady. And you're too used to denying what you deserve. The words struck deeper than I wanted them to. I rose quickly, retreating to the kitchen under the pretense of checking the kettle. My hands shook as I set it on the stove. Moments later he was there too, leaning casually against the counter. Too close. Too steady. You don't have to answer me, he said again, softer this time. But don't tell me you don't feel it. Because I see it in your eyes. My breath caught. I turned away, staring out the window where sunlight glimmered on the wet leaves of the garden. Evan, I whispered, my voice unsteady. I don't know what this is. Then let it be what it is, he replied gently. The kettle whistled, breaking the moment. I poured the water into 2 cups, my hands trembling. We stood side by side, steam curling between us, neither speaking. And in that silence, thick and alive, I knew one thing with certainty. Nothing could ever return to the way it had been. That night the house felt unusually alive, though nothing stirred but the old clock ticking steadily on the mantel. Evan had stayed later than usual. Too late for a casual visit, too late for excuses about tools or weather. We had eaten supper together again, laughter slipping between us in fits and starts, though neither of us spoke of the thing that pressed thick in the silence. When the dishes were done and the lamps glowed low, I found myself standing at the window, watching the moonlight spill across the yard. Evan was still there, sitting in Robert's old chair, his long frame folded into it as if it belonged to him now. The sight sent an ache through me, familiar, dangerous. You're quiet tonight, he said gently, breaking the hush. I have too much on my mind, I replied, my eyes still on the window. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Is it me? The honesty of the question startled me. I turned, my hands clutching the curtain. Yes, I admitted. The word slipped out before I could stop it. His gaze deepened. Then tell me what you want me to do. The room seemed to shrink, the air too thick to breathe. What did I want him to do? Leave? Stay? Pretend none of this had ever happened? or acknowledge the truth we had both been circling for days. I can't tell you that, I whispered. Why not? His voice was steady, but beneath it I heard the tremor of something raw. Because once I say it, there's no going back. He rose then, crossing the room slowly, deliberately, until he stood only a step away. I could see the rise and fall of his chest, the flicker of lamplight in his eyes. I don't need you to say it, he murmured. I just need to know I'm not alone in feeling it. My breath caught. My body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly into the warmth of his nearness. His hand lifted, hesitant, trembling, and brushed lightly against mine. It wasn't a grab, wasn't bold. Just the barest touch, enough to set every nerve alight. I should have pulled back. I should have reminded him of the years between us, the neighbors who would whisper, the world that would never understand. But I didn't. I let the touch linger. The silence swelled, fuller than words. For a heartbeat, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then the old clock chimed, the sound loud and startling. I stepped back quickly, breaking the moment, clutching my robe tighter around me. You should go, I whispered. It's late. His eyes searched mine, steady, unflinching. For a moment I thought he might protest. But instead, he nodded slowly, as though he understood more than I had spoken. Good night, Miss Margaret, he said softly, though the way he said my name carried more than politeness. Good night, Evan. He walked to the door, pulling his jacket from the chair. But before stepping out into the night, he turned back one last time. You may not want to say it, he said quietly, but I see it. And I'll wait as long as it takes. The door closed gently behind him, leaving the house silent once more. I stood there in the glow of the lamplight, my heart pounding. My hand still tingled where his had brushed mine. I pressed it to my chest, unsure whether to feel shame, fear, or longing. Perhaps all three. The night pressed close around me, and for the first time in years I felt both more alive and more uncertain than I had ever been. I don't know where this story will lead. Maybe nowhere. Maybe somewhere I'm too afraid to name. What I do know is this. Sometimes the lines we thought were unbreakable begin to blur. And once they blur, nothing is quite the same again. Dear friends, if you've followed me through this story, you know life never stops surprising us. Do you think love, or connection, can appear in the most unexpected places, even when the world says it shouldn't? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more true stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, because the next one may echo in your heart too.